Germany, Eva Furman. I'm hearing that we are being recorded. Would you like me to begin?
Yes, sure. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Just to continue.
I think so. Yeah, it's fine.
Would you like me to do it again? What do you prefer?
All right, let's do it again. Let's do it again.
Okay.
Let's do it again.
Take two.
All right.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the Section for Sociology of Media and the Croatian Sociological Society, we are here for the presentation of the book entitled The Politics of Culture in Contemporary Turkey, edited by Pierre Hecker from Philipps University, Marburg, Germany, Ivo Furman, Istanbul University, and Kaya Akyıldız from Istanbul Bahçeşehir University. And this volume is just out. We are really happy to be able to talk about it. It's been out from Edinburgh University Press across some 300 pages and 16 empirical chapters. This wide-ranging interdisciplinary volume explores cultural power and popular culture in an array of everyday contexts, cases, processes that speak to both Turkish cultural studies and, above all, to the transformations we are witnessing, some from Turkey and many of us from outside Turkey, which can be dubbed as the transition from old to new Turkey during the rule of Erdoğan and AKP. My name is Zlatan Krajina. I'm an associate professor of media studies at the University of Zagreb. And in the following hour, we'd like to present this book in the company of the three editors, but also to everyone who has joined us, talk about cultural studies in the Turkish context, about populist authoritarianism or authoritarian populism, about transnational collaborations, about translation from, in this case, British cultural studies to the Turkish context, and other interesting phenomena that intrigue us in the occasion of the publication of this exciting book. I'd like to begin by asking the editors in no preconceived order. Whoever feels ready can simply jump in a conversation which will not be very strictly organized, but will touch upon these issues. First, to begin to explain to us the ways in which this book addresses authoritarian populism in Turkey and what that is simply about.
Pierre, would you like to begin?
Yeah, so then I'll
you
begin,
can say
because
you
arranged a different order, but let me begin. Okay. Okay. So what the book basically focuses on is the relationship between culture, power, and politics in present-day Turkey, or more precisely, on the era of AKP rule for the past 20 years, since 2002. And by saying the book focuses on this relationship between culture, power, and politics, we are also trying to contribute to a wider debate on authoritarian populism and the decline of democracy in Turkey. So this term authoritarian populism, that's the way we use it, not populist authoritarianism, but authoritarian populism is a term that goes back to Stuart Hall, as most of you might know. Or more precisely, Stuart Hall's work on Thatcherism in the late 1970s and early 1980s. So what Hall was concerned about back then was that Thatcherism might turn into a new form of organized fascism. And that's what he used this term authoritarian populism for, as he called it, an exceptional form of the capitalist state that, unlike classical fascism, still remains certain structures, certain democratic structures in place. And in contrast to classical fascism, as for instance defined by the Frankfurt School of Sociology, this new form of authoritarian populism is based mainly on popular consent. And with this reference to popular consent, then we're with Gramsci and cultural hegemony. Ivo, would you like to talk about that, or do you want me to continue to talk about this a bit further?
Well, why not you continue a little bit?
Okay, so then I'll continue for another minute or so. So Gramsci he's also familiar to most of you, I guess. So he used this term of cultural hegemony in order to reflect on the balance between the balance between consent and coercion, which is important in order to establish political power. And Gramsci was of the opinion that it is rather consensus than coercion that helps to establish political power. So in other words, the ruling elite, the ruling class, needs to establish its particular worldview as a commonly accepted norm in order to create consent. So we are also not talking about consent as a result of a process of negotiation. So it's not about a pluralist discussion on what should be societal consents, but it's rather consensus established through dominance. And since we consider culture in this book through the lens of British cultural studies, then of course culture is always linked to power, and culture is seen as a side of political struggle and as an instrument to convey a particular ideological perspective, or to establish this particular worldview of the ruling class as a commonly accepted norm. So I think this can be best demonstrated with regard to what has been talked about as neo-Ottomanism in Turkey, or for instance, we can be exemplified through these neo-Ottomanist television series that are quite popular in Turkey at the moment. And these are means in order to rewrite Turkish history, a means to rewrite Turkish identity, and to establish this concept. But I'll stop here. We can delve deeper into this later on. So I hope it was halfway clear what I tried to explain. Okay.
Ivo, which kind of cases did your contributors consider as indicative of this hegemonic struggle?
Well, our book has actually,
of New Turkey.
We have actually 4 sections in our book. The first section is called Subcultures and the Politics of Lifestyles. And here we talk about alcohol, heavy metal, atheism and non-belief. Then we have one section called Satire and Agitprop in New Turkey. And here we talk about state propaganda and how the state instrumentalizes advertising, public screens, and so forth to create this kind of atmosphere of authoritarian populism. Then we have part 3, which is civil society and the politics of gender. Here we look at especially ecological issues as well as gender, mostly women in Turkey. And then we have media, actually we have 2 more sections. Mediating neo-Ottomanism in popular culture. And here we look at cinema, television, history books, and gentrification projects. And then the last part is called New Turkey's Ethno-Religious Others. And here we look at Sunniness, about Roma, and about a minority in the Black Sea called Romeka. But maybe one point to add to what Pierre was just saying was that when we are talking about authoritarian populism in Turkey, it's very important to address the point of how we got here in the first place. Because, if you were following the news up until 2013, 2014, Turkey was presented as the shining example of how democracy, political Islam, secularism, neoliberal economics, all of these kind of different dynamics could perfectly coexist all together, and how Turkish society was supposed to be a model for other countries, other societies in the Middle East. So this was something that was, quite a popular discourse, and for a long time, the West and Europe saw Erdoğan and the AKP as this driving, modernizing force that somehow was, dissolving all the problems of old Kemalist secular Turkey and establishing a new society which seemed to be, progressive and, in harmony with one another. So what really went wrong here? And I think this is a question that we need to address. So a bunch of, things happened, I would say, that kind of, not only caused the Turkish model to collapse, but also pushed Erdoğan and the AKP towards a more authoritarian path. And here, Gezi Park is certainly one of the events. The coup attempt of July 15 might be another one. And what we see is that increasingly during this period that, not only, this was, and another thing to kind of emphasize is that, since the beginning of Erdoğan's rule in Turkey, almost in 2001, there was always critics that were saying that Erdoğan and the AKP instrumentalize parliamentary democracy, that they try to appropriate the mechanisms of parliamentary democracy to create a majoritarianism, non-democratic form. And there's even like videos of Erdoğan saying this in numerous points, but nobody believed these critics in Turkey. But then what happened after 2013, 2014 was that, how should I say, the wolf shed off the sheepskin and revealed itself. And I think that this is also something quite important to kind of talk, because it was not maybe something that was a revolution, but something that happened overnight, bit by bit, with AKP and Erdoğan chipping away at democratic institutions in Turkey, chipping away at the judiciary, the education system, the security forces, and us eventually ending up in the situation where the regime in Turkey is now no longer a faulty democracy, but one which is, parliamentary system with authoritarian leanings, and I think this is something that's very important to emphasize. And this is where the book kind of comes in. And, there's a lot of, academic studies that have been done looking at this from different institutions, the states, education, judiciary, all of these kind of things. But our book is the first one that looks at it from the realm of popular culture. How was popular culture instrumentalized or used to legitimize the emergence of such a semi-autocratic regime? Maybe Kaya, I think at this point it might be useful for you to jump in.
I wanted to thank you, Ivo, for this provision of context even furthermore. And Kaya, could you tell us more about the role of culture, which is the prime focus of this obviously multi-dimensional process? Not only political or economic, but also cultural. What was the place? What was it supporting a revolution or transformation? Was it more? Was it a performative subversion? Was it something deeper? How would you assess its significance?
Okay, I think there's no problem with my voice, although I'm a little bit, sour. So you guys can hear me proper, right?
Yes. You have a cold. What did you want to say?
Well, actually, I think I can frame it that way. I'm not going to claim those views necessarily shared by all contributors, but I think in my article and what we see as editors in general, I think there's a common understanding when it's coming to things that I'm going to posit. We are mostly taking cue from that understanding, as what AKP did was, or what they succeed, because amongst mostly the opposition, that there's such a belief. When it's coming to field of culture, if we take the field of culture in its narrowest sense, so like there's such critics, and actually they're quoting Erdoğan, and Erdoğan was simply claiming that they were quite successful when it's coming to economy, which is not true when you look into GDP per capita since 2014, I guess, consecutively 8 or 9 years, GDP is dropping. That's not something we see in history of republic. So in that sense, it is very unlikely to talk about economic success. I'm not going into detail, and but if you just a little bit literate about reading some numbers, some, have some familiarity with the economics, the story was not that great, or success was just a story that they would love to believe. But, however, Erdoğan believes that they're quite successful. His governments were quite successful in terms of modernizing country. When it's coming to other things like, I would say, renewing infrastructure, those projects, those famous projects, so it's like which we called ESER, and this is like pretty met that understanding in Turkish rights glossary. You come across that like leftist politicians are just talkers; they are not doing anything. But like people like them are starting from Özal, and you can even go back to Emerald. They were always taking pride in, they were successful in things. So he was simply saying that we are quite successful when it's coming to those things. But one thing that hurts me, and kind of like I have to admit, we failed in the field of culture. And he's
This is
referred
Erdoğan
that
speaking, yeah.
Yeah, this is Erdoğan speaking, and he's constantly making reference to that. But I think since 2015, I've been counting at least every year, maybe once or twice, he's delivering such a speech. We are far behind because, leftists or kind of like secular circles were taking control, and they were kind of like gatekeepers in that model. They were not allowing. There are certain institutions like elite universities, or like when it's coming to arts circles, they're not allowing those conservatives, Muslim, let's say, artists, poets, writers, and etc., to be popularized, or kind of like they are not maybe exactly saying that way, but didn't succeed in. So that has to break. And like whatever he was trying to do in education was not also a success story. Not talking about infrastructure here. He's also taking pride about like building those schools. So, and mostly the opposition was thinking, he's just admitting. Like he's clearly stating that it's a failed project. This is pretty narrow understanding. We believe, I guess, if I'm not putting words into mouth of my co-editors, we think that if we understand in its narrow sense, like they didn't come up with a single good writer, poet, or composer, referring to those conservatist, nationalist, let's say, artists, writers, or whatever. Yeah, we may say that. Depending on your taste, you may not find stuff that they produce, like movies that they made, they're not so great. That's what they were saying. Or, like it was against conspiracy of those seculars, which is a little and kind of like meaning their work. But at the end of the day, if you think in more, let's say, the cultural hegemony, it's a hegemony project, in the sense that it's posited by, as it just mentioned by Pierre and Ivo, if you read it to form the way people understand in the world, their values. So like, let's say, what kind of society you want to live in? What should be the values? Like, should you celebrate this neoliberal understanding of individualism, like trickle-down economics, everybody's for themselves? It's like homo homini lupus type of society. On top of that, like reaffirming Turkish nationalism with this, irredentless dreams of bringing back Ottoman past, kind of like bringing an end to the suffering of the pious majority of the country, and like how you interpret the world around yourself as a human being. I think they're not so unsuccessful. That's what we are saying. AKP, from the beginning, they have a hegemony project, which they transform the society into much more Sunni, much more, religious, pious, however you'd like to call, more nationalist in that sense, a kind of affirming that past.
Ethno-nationalist, in fact.
Yeah, ethno-nationalist, if you'd like to call it that way. And, like they were, in that sense, transform the whole cultural field, lifestyles. Yeah, like any field that you can imagine, you can say, well, this is like at the end of the day, if you call them almost like having those totalitarian fascistic tendencies, shouldn't we all expect that they are going to conquer all the capillaries of the society? They want to take control of whole civil society. That's something we should expect. Yeah, that's happened. But on top of that, no field in that sense. And field here is not used in the sense that necessarily we use in sociological theory, mostly referring to Bourdieu's sense, but pretty much like in every field, like when it's coming to alcohol, with the regulations and etc., which you will write about, but the imagery. When it's coming to TV serials and what kind of story that they're narrating, their textbooks, what they are teaching us at schools. Also, you see the number of these Imam Hatip schools. These are religious schools that they are, forefronted in their era. The way that they understand the gender issue, they launched that institution called Kadam, the daughter of the president at that time. He was prime minister, I guess. Erdoğan was one of the founders, and their understanding of gender was there. They were even putting, like, what are the right sports? This ethno sport festival. Their understanding of technology. As technology is not in serving or human being, but it's good to make maybe those technological marvels, bombs and etc. Those planes nowadays. We're talking about that. By the way, we are passing through a terrible stage in Ukraine. Those let's say war machines were used. So that's how they are understanding. And of course, that was coming with the understanding and interpretation of the world, like this suffering, kind of like, let's say, they were using this white Turk thing, this subordinated masses by those secular, westernized, or whose mindset was corrupted by those Western ideals, group of, or elite, is almost from beginning of the modernization era. So like they were talking about 200 years. Recently, this interior minister decided that it's like 300 years. So roughly, they didn't exactly decide, but every once in a while they're dropping things like that, vilifying that the imagery, that white Turk, or that I think that they created, and attacking, undermining all those notions of secularism, which is dangerous. Actually, we have to be more religious. We have to accept this Sunni past. So
Kaya, would you say that that culture was supportive of this, or was it an obstacle if you would submit to this black and white picture, which is a kind of media approach? But I'm obviously the book suggests that the picture is much more complicated. But
yeah. I'm talking about
kind of wrap up this part.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, like, that's their project. Of course, when it's implemented or when it's in practice, it's kind of like becoming pretty hybrid thing. You see strange fellows in that project joining that, jumping on the train. Sometimes they are dropping. So that's why people were, when they're looking and when they try to understand, they were confused, as if there's no project, as if like it's a failed project. What we are saying, don't be so sure about it's a failed project, or don't believe that it's totally just sham or like after Erdoğan gone, things are going back to whatever it used to be, or kind of like those values, those set of values forefronted by these guys, this type of a Sunni supremacist values, this understanding of national purity, resoluteness, like those irredentist dreams of empire. They are not going anywhere, unfortunately. They are going to, unfortunately, in the sense that if you are dreaming a democratic culture, a much more democratic country. So I think I made it pretty clear, my side too. But that's the thing. That's what we are saying. I think I talked a little bit too much. You guys.
And now your colleague Pierre wants to take over.
No, just I just wanted to add something to this. In 2014, just a year after the Gezi Park protests, which were quite important, for the government to see that cultural production was really important to resist their rule, to resist their worldviews. I spoke to a colleague, to Dahan, Iraq, and we had this discussion about culture and who controls the field of culture. And I remember that Dahan back then said, like, yeah, in the field of culture, the government is really unsuccessful. So they never So they don't have any successful artists, no writers. I mean, basically what Kaya just said. So I think in that field, the government has failed. But when it comes to popular culture, the government was quite successful, in particular when we talk about television series, when we talk about cinema. So we have these immensely popular television series that focus on neo-Ottomanism in terms of historical figures, historical fiction that people internalize as like, you know, this is our real history. And with this, so in that sense, with regard to this, I think that popular culture has been an important tool for manipulating the Turkish public to consenting to the rule of the Erdoğan regime and its worldviews.
Would you say that the popular culture products we are also consuming in Croatia, because soap operas from Turkey are very popular, they're shown in primetime television, is part of that machinery?
I don't know exactly what soap operas you're consuming here, but
I'm sorry, I also don't know the exact titles, but probably the ones which are very popular and oriented to the.
I mean, look, what I have in mind, for instance,
which present. I know my mother always is happy to see traditional values being presented in a very positive way. So traditional in terms of family relationships, which are presented, and this is irrespective of cultural or religious background. Like the people I hear this from are quite diverse in profile. So I'm just interested how.
Yeah, I think that's also part of the wider picture, you know, to convey these conservative values, because Erdoğan, as you also might know, he spoke about the aim of raising a pious generation, a religious generation. But what I had in mind are television series like Diriliş Ertuğrul, Resurrection Ertuğrul, for instance, or Kutul Amare, or more present-day television series like Söz, you know, about Turkish elite units fighting terrorism. And do you know this Diriliş Ertuğrul, Resurrection Ertuğrul, this historical television series?
It's like Erdoğan's Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's a bit like this, you know. And I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, you know. Ertuğrul, so most likely he was the father of Osman, you know, the founder of the dynasty, of the Ottoman dynasty. But from a historical perspective, we know nothing about Ertuğrul. I think the only thing we know is, you know, an inscription on a coin. And from this, we can guess that he might have been the father of Osman. That's all we know from a historical perspective. But nowadays, you know, he's like the founding father of the dynasty, and people are even building monuments about Ertuğrul. So he became a real figure, and he stands for Ottomanism. He stands for Muslimness. He stands for the new Turkish identity. So this is what I meant by reinventing Turkish history and identity. And I think from this perspective, the government has been really successful. Also, and you know, then I think just yesterday, you know, when the invasion of Ukraine started, we were talking about some tweets by some AKP trolls who were like, yeah, and I imagine that the next morning I'll hear the news that the Turkish troops will invade Iraq and reconquer Mosul and Erbil, you know? And this is exactly these are exactly the values that are being portrayed in these television series, romanticizing martyrdom, to die for your nation, to fight terrorism, to stand up against Westernism, to be a good Muslim. You know, you have all this religious symbolism incorporated into these television series. And I think here the government has been very successful. And this is to mobilize the public and to prepare them for their aims. And they also have these agitprop videos. We also talk about these agitprop videos in the book. And here it's for me, it's quite clear, you know, it's warmongering. They are preparing the population for further wars. I mean, that's my personal perspective. I don't know if Ivo and
unfortunately, we are doing this presentation all being aware of the fact that a war has started just recently, like yesterday in Europe, and we are addressing a European country, and we are all dispersed in different parts of Europe now, and it's a moment in which we are aware that, you know, even when we speak about a book which obviously in its theoretical and empirical focus is concentrated on one nation. We are actually talking about a phenomenon which can be easily compared across nations. So maybe alongside acknowledging what's going on in Ukraine, can we expand the horizon right now and reflect on the possible comparisons with authoritarian populisms that are taking place right now across the world? You can limit it by your own choice. It's certainly Turkey is not the only one. I was well. I can hint at one case I encountered just last weekend in Zagreb. One usual place for critical debate called Mama hosted people from Hungarofuturism. They are artists, activists, surrealists, and so on, subversionists who also engage in cultural practices to tackle illiberal tendencies in Hungary. And obviously, what you are investigating is not an isolated case. So, could you reflect on that?
Yeah, if I may start, Ivo, do you want? Or
let me just jump in. Yeah, so
okay.
like, you know, the easiest example to give is, I'm sure you've all like listened to Putin's strange and revisionist speech that he made before invading Ukraine. That, you know, Ukraine has been always part of, you know, Russia, it was never a state, and so forth, you know. Basically, you know, this kind of revisionist historianism is also very popular in Turkey with Neo-Ottomanism, you know, and what we see is that, and I don't know the Russia case so well, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was television series in Russia that will pop up, or they already exist, that kind of try to legitimize or create a historical understanding of the Russian Empire that's very much based around these things. If you look at, for instance, the Turkish TV series Paritat, which is a chapter in our book, you see that this one Sultan, Abdülhamid II, which is traditionally considered to be a despot, a man that you know, imposed very draconian censorship, you know, practices throughout the Ottoman Empire, was a very cruel, very ruthless person, now under Erdoğan becomes rehabilitated as somebody who loved the nation and was one that was trying to protect the Muslims from foreign forces, you know, and this is something that Erdoğan and his ideology used to, you know, kind of traditionally support. And now we see a TV series that suddenly explains this or creates a setting for it, you know. And one more thing about the TV series, which is very, I think that maybe just to add to what Pierre was saying, is that in Turkey, quite often the boundaries between reality and TV series get blurred. So we have this, you know, Ertuğrul Resurrection TV series. And what you see is that, you know, during election campaigns, that Erdoğan often gets characters from the TV set onto the stage with him, and they are dressed up as characters, you know, as they're not actors, but people from the TV series. So there is this very strange kind of interplay going on between what is, you know, shown on popular culture and what is everyday politics, you know. And I think this is also something that is very unique and very specific to this kind of regime. And when maybe one more point to say is that the idea of consent and how consent is created through in these kind of regimes is that it's very much based on the idea of polarization. This is something that maybe we didn't speak about so much, but that we need to devote some time to. I mean, Erdoğan and his politics are always about trying to appeal to the most main common denominator and then playing from that always, and always trying to pick scapegoats in society, marginalize them, criminalize them. And quite often the way this is done is not just through words and politics, but also through TV series. You look at these militaristic TV series that are out, and it's always, you know, the Kurds or the, you know, Alevis or, you know, the ethno-religious others that are, you know, being scapegoated as people, traitors inside Turkey that are, you know, wanting to stab the nation from behind the back and so forth. So a lot of this poison, so to speak, and it is very poisonous, you know, language is very poisonous, imagery is circulated or distributed to society through these kind of mediums. But it's also a place where a lot of pushback also happens, you know. So it's not just a one-way road. It's not that, you know, the current government, current regime has, you know, managed to, you know, use, you know, mobilize, you know, mass media, you know, communication and so forth, and kind of, you know, brainwash the society. But there's a much more kind of complex interplay. And some case studies we have in our book are also about the other side, about, you know, more counter-hegemonic discourses that also emerge in popular culture.
Okay. All right. We are getting contributions from editors on different questions that we already posed. I'm still very intrigued by the possibility of comparison with other authoritarian populism. So if one of the editors would like to expand on that briefly, we are already through half time, and we have some things to discuss too, and we have a question from the audience waiting. So just briefly, Kaya,
okay, I'll do that. I'll do it. Okay, you go
right.
first.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing maybe I would say not so peculiar, but pretty interesting. And you know, like if you want to understand that transformation when it's coming to this hegemony project or the cultural hegemony, here I'm referring to, of course, again, not the field of art or, you know, like actually high art, not that field, but, you know, political hegemony. So your project to convince people that the society that we want to live in is such a society, and through such values we can succeed. In that sense, we have to understand the importance of Sherif Mardin and his understanding, what he was positing, center and periphery, that distinction. AKP elites and actually, you know, like liberal circles, not in the American sense here I'm using, I would say literally, you know, the liberal that we are using in the sense in Europe. They were, I would say, Opera quite successfully used this discourse. So it's like this majority, of course, like Sunni conservatist pious majority, which is kind of like neglected and kind of not able to or not have the chance to control the political power really, or the state apparatus. But the state apparatus was controlled by those elitist forces. So it's like a centrist forces. And those pious people who are coming from peripheries, they were constantly fighting to take control. So that was a story. That's a struggle between them, and etc. They were using that term specifically, vesayetçi güçler, referring to tutelar regime. So it's like some sort of tutelar regime. Turkey is some sort of tutelar democracy. And the struggle was against that deep state, against that, you know, like elites. Now, just recall what Trump was saying, or did those discourses regarding deep state, those elites, Volvo driving, latte drinking. We have a similar
Drain
thing
the
in
swamp.
Turkey. Say again?
Drain the swamp.
Yeah. For that, I think Ivo was given that example in Tel Aviv. Actually, there was a Bibi was blaming people, those guys who were, you know, living in Tel Aviv and partying and etc. They are far from understanding ordinary Israelis. Same discourse. So it's like funny that you see when I'm talking to my American friends, they were talking about deep state, and I was saying, oh man, it's kind of like you guys are repeating us. That's all that thing about
maybe they learn from each other, from the benefit of global
like,
media.
when you ask that, that comes to my mind. And you know, like rather than seeing state as some sort of, you know, relational thing, the struggles are going on. We have those two camps. Center, those centrist forces like tutelary, the ones who are kind of like soul-defined, this tutelar regime, keeping away those majority, Sunni conservatist majority from really controlling the state power and etc. And that fight necessarily, that you know, like struggle between those two parties is going to be over when those Sunni majority conservatist nationalists, whatever you're going to call, fraction took over. It's going to automatically democratize a country. So
okay, Kaya, sorry, I'm very sorry. We have two hands desperately waiting to jump in.
Sorry,
let's not keep them waiting for much longer. So I think Krešimir Krolo was the first, but I'm maybe wrong.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm first. I don't know if you're wrong.
Okay, just go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Zlatan. Well, my question is regarding the TV shows, the soap operas. I'll try not to frame it as any type of a comment, more of a question, but I have to start with a comment because in Croatia we had also similar projects, let's say state projects that wanted to romanticize or rewrite certain aspects of Croatian history, but it didn't have that kind of an appeal within the broader audience, or at least that's what the general assumption is. My question is, you talk as if these products have this kind of a large overreaching effect, considering the Turkish society and the audience, but are there any reception studies into the content of these soap operas, of the Suleiman, the Magnificent, and similar? Do they tell us how audience actually perceives this kind of narratives? Because in Croatia, you also have, let's say, audience who does that sort of a selective reading. They take from these kind of soap operas what they want, and then they disregard everything else. Like what someone said before, how they enforce the traditional values. They see that in the context of family and relation and a husband, wife, and children, but they don't see this kind of imperial Ottoman narrative within this show. So my question is there anything that can actually more empirically prove that this is actually having some kind of a effect on the audience in general? Thank you.
Pierre,
thank you very much for your question. Yes, I'd like to answer and try to be brief. To my knowledge, we do not have a representative reception studies to date with regard to what effects we have with regard to these television series. We only recently organized a workshop on Turkish television series in Leiden in December last year. And this was something, we learned that we need more reception studies. What's the impact of these television series? However, what we can state without doubt is that these television series are immensely popular and they are taken seriously, even from a political perspective. So a couple of months ago, there was a journalist in Turkey and he criticized Ertuğrul and the television series. And I think also Osman. So he criticized these fictional characters in the television series. And then he got arrested and being accused of, what was it? Speaking badly about a statesman or something like that. So the state is taking this seriously. So the guy got arrested and interrogated, and only later he was released. And of course you find many references in political speeches. And you can even see, there were some huge rallies organized by the AKP and Erdoğan. And even the television actors of these television series were invited, and they held speeches in front of a huge crowd of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So I think we can say there is a significant impact, even though we do not have these reception studies yet, but that's something definitely needed.
Just to add to Pierre, I mean, there's numerous instances where Erdoğan and AKP politicians openly say, if you want to understand your culture, your history, watch X TV series, and they just give a name and they just directly, point in that direction. So there is some sort of a significance over there, and these series are popular, and that's the other part, and they're also exported around the world. I mean, we read semi-funny things in the news that in Pakistan, for instance, they put a statue of one character from the TV series, to honor him, while this character doesn't really exist in real life, and so forth. So it has some sort of an effect. You're right about selective reading, but Kaya. Yeah.
Just go to Turkish Twitter and type Ertuğrul, all those characters. You're going to see people putting those pens on their heads, those fake swords, and they were taking pictures like as if they were those characters.
But are they making
Madness.
fun of the series, or what are they doing?
No,
No, they're watching
no.
it and they're like kind of playing along, like swinging swords, whatever.
Okay. All right, guys, we have a question from Jeremy Walton. Now we don't see him. I assume he's still here. Maybe he had to leave just for a moment. So as soon as he's back, we'll get to his question. Can you tell me something about? Can you tell us something about another level of internationalism in your project, which considers, of course, your engagement with British cultural studies, with concepts which emerged from a specific context in the development of a certain national space in the contemporary history, which is British identity. To what extent did you find these concepts useful as they are? To what extent did you have to, wrestle with their specific origin and maybe modify them along the way, use some others? How did this intellectual process of translation go in your work on this book?
Yeah, this one's definitely for you.
I'm really sorry, Zlatan. While you were asking your question, I was typing a response here in the chat. Totally embarrassed, but could you at least partly repeat your question? And then
which challenges did you face while translating the specific set of ideas that you use to analyze your cases from British cultural studies and their own national preoccupation from a specific period of time after the Second World War, and especially during the rise of Margaret Thatcher? Was it just easy to take ideas from that context and just apply them and see results, or you had to really negotiate where the limits of their usefulness?
Actually,
I hope it's the second.
Right. No. Actually, I found it quite easy, to translate these ideas from factualism or horse ideas to the present situation. And I'm not familiar if you're familiar with some other works on authoritarianism that came out over the past couple of years, but some authors even picked up Hall's term again, authoritarian populism, like Jeremy Morlock or Inglehart and Norris. They published books on that. And what they describe, these references to the glorious past, the right-wing populist regimes' attempts to regain the nation's dignity, to be anti-genderist, anti-feminist, and so on. This you can really copy-paste it with regards to the Turkish case. So I didn't find it too difficult, to be honest.
Which part was not applicable?
I mean, what was missing was the focus on on ordinary life, culture as a form of ordinary life. Ivo briefly mentioned it. So we also have a chapter on the consumption of alcohol. We have a chapter on metal music, for instance. And this is something that was missing from the wider picture, not with regard to Hall, but with regard to the other studies that were published in recent years on authoritarian populism. And then to understand this cultural deviance in everyday life as a political statement. I mean, okay, it's in the cultural studies, in British cultural studies, but it's not visible in some of the other present day works. That wasn't a very good answer, I guess, but
it was meaningful. Thank you. And there is Jeremy Walton. Can you share with us your question?
Greetings, everyone. My apologies. I had to switch venues here in the midst of evening chaos. Just a brief thanks to Ivo, Kaya, and Pierre. I'm really looking forward to reading this volume in full. Ellerinize sağlık. I can't think of any event that really has so seamlessly integrated my long-standing research in Turkey, my professional affiliations in Germany, and my home life here in Croatia. So congratulations on that, though I know it wasn't your intention. I have a whole lot of comments and questions, but I'll try to be as precise as possible. First of all, I'll move from the more sort of conceptual and theoretical to the more content-oriented. Thinking about the Gramscian inheritance by way of British cultural studies, it strikes me that one of the precedents in regard to the Turkish studies literature here really is clearly Cihan Tuğal's Passive Revolution, which was published, I believe, in 2009. So at a very earlier moment in this transformation of life, society, and the state in Turkey. But it's really more about political economic networks than popular culture in any sense. So I wondered if at any point in the book you position yourself in relation to Tuğal's arguments there, since it would seem to make sense. Secondly, just based on the titles of the sections of the book, I get a sense that the sort of focus on what you might call in that Gramscian vein counter-hegemonic culture is really about subcultures that would have always had a degree of counter-hegemonic relationship to Kemalist culture as well in Turkey. Perhaps not drinking culture, of course, but in general, that's the flavor I get. What do you make of Kemalism itself as a newly counter-hegemonic cultural formation in Turkey? Is that a question you address in the book? Because I think it's quite an important one. Thirdly, and this is perhaps getting to some of what Zlatan was pointing to with regards to the comparisons and contrasts, one of this, and this is by way more of a comment, I suppose, and an observation, but it's so striking that Erdoğan embodies what you might think of as the snowflake mentality of these populist authoritarians. He's so easily offended, right? And there's something about the new environment, media environment here, but there's also something I think about the rise of the Trumpian, Erdoganian, Orbanian, Putin, Xi Jinping, et al. Bolsonaro, and so forth figure as embodying in public this authoritarian leader, very masculinized, who is also immensely sensitive. And I don't know what to make of it exactly, but I think it's something probably worth discussing. Fourthly, I wondered, again, I have to look at the book, but it strikes me that in terms of the cultural field in Turkey as a whole, of course, the problem with that Bourdieusian concept is that it does have a way of potentially leveling differences regionally and in terms of class, but in particular with regards to Kurdistan and Kurdish popular culture, you saw a massive rise in the production of Kurdish language mass media in the early AKP years. Now, of course, things have changed. So again, I just wondered if you deal with that in the book. And then finally, mainly because I've been enjoying them so much, what do you make of the television series, the Netflix series like Kulüp and Bir Başkadır or Ethos, which are really extraordinarily counter-hegemonic when you put them into comparison and contrast with something like Payitaht Abdülhamit or Ertuğrul, Diriliş Ertuğrul, particularly Kulüp, really bringing out in a very enjoyable and aestheticized medium this period of intense strife over the minorities of Istanbul in the 1940s and 1950s. So I'll stop there, though I could go on. But thank you again. I really look reading this is what I should say.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Who wants to start? Ivo, you just raised your thumb. I thought you raised your hand.
Yes, I did. But Kulüp is I really enjoyed watching it myself, and it is counter-hegemonic, but it's also indicative, I think, of a new mainstream that is kind of emerging. And I'm not surprised that it's something that's put on showed on Netflix. But more than that, that it is coincides right around the time when we're seeing Erdoğan and the AKP falling drastically in the polls, you know. And I think it also ties into, I'm not sure where it's going, but this idea of, you know, what Jeremy just mentioned, with Kemalism becoming popular again, you know, or this kind of new central kind, because it's not really Kemalism. I mean, there is this kind of, you know, vision, I would say.
If I may also directly add to that, Ivo, is that? Oh,
Sure, John, go ahead.
okay. Actually, we also discussed this these new television series, Bir Başkadır and Kulüp, during this Leiden workshop in December. And I think what we can say about this, these are Netflix productions, and they have more freedom with regard to content than other Turkish television series are. And what I also took from the workshop, we also invited some people who were, you know, from the producer side, and apparently the government is taking directly, directly influence the scripts of television series like Diriliş Ertuğrul. So there's a lot of state money flowing into these projects. And they even use the same directors, screenwriters then to produce these agitprop videos. So these are very much the same people in the production side. So they get a lot of state resources, and there's more freedom with regard to these Netflix productions. Now, with regard to Kemalism, I wouldn't see Kemalism as a, okay. Of course, we can also define or see Kemalism, you know, from this counter-hegemonic perspective. And Esra Özürek, I think already in 2006, she wrote about this, you know, about the former dominant culture of Kemalism now being transferred to the private space and becoming counter-hegemonic. But what I consider more important relates to the question of secularism. And I think there are some indicators so that we might even talk about a new secularism from below, you know, this reaction or counter-reaction towards pious conservatism in Turkish society. You know, we also talked about this in Berlin during our workshop about, you know, this phenomenon of religious fatigue and the young people from conservative families becoming more secular as a reaction towards pious conservatism. For me, that's more interesting actually than to reflect about Kemalism again as a form of a counterculture. There were more questions. Who wants to go on?
we are very near the end, so.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
I can maybe just drop that. I think in my piece you can find why AKP was stay in power so long. That's the question we have to address. When you think about, let's say, a political party that stay in, you know, power so long, it's in that sense it's unique. In multi-party I'm referring, and of course, like all its enemies one by one, and able to, you know, like bring them down, and, you know, like claim almost like okay, it's always some sort of coalition, but bringing those successful coalitions. So it's like a politics part of the story. And I think what John Tuel doing was, of course, it was making sense in 2009 to say that, but in 2022, passive revolution does not really, okay, that's really, I have to be careful, not really applicable, it seems like to me, because we are not talking about like, okay, they were becoming neoliberalism, it's dropping those, let's say, ideals and change the system within. So that's why it's not like an open, typical revolution that we see type of story. And it's a kind of like 2009 when you're thinking about that's just a model, you know, country in that sense. So he was explaining that. Yeah, but what we see after that was a totally different story. And it's like a new experiment in power. So in that sense, I was trying to touch, and I think it's important to understand the economic transformation. I was also making some references, some literature review, but it's something I would like to discuss in detail in some of the time. What is it there really, when it's political economy perspective, how it's working? Because there's that side of the story, although I believe it's pretty much related with the identity, all those things, but also there's that background to it. also.
Maybe one final note about Netflix, by the way, because these Netflix productions, they are big, they're expensive, they're flashy, but the thing is that people watch them. I mean, Kulüpü, Başkadır were very popular in Turkey. A lot of people watch it, and also suggests something I think important, that the new TV consumer, the young generation, Generation Z, they're not interested in Erdoğan's television series that much. I mean, he targets, if you look at, Diriliş Ertuğrul, the more the state-funded TV series, they are for this more different demography. But when you look at the younger generation, they're all watching Netflix TV series. And this is indicative of how cultural trends in Turkey are changing right now. And it shows also a little bit the pushback or the resistance that the younger generation has towards Erdoğanist TV series, and I think this is also something very important. I mean, the people I speak with, my students, they're also fed up of watching this glorious history kind of, TV series. They want to find out what's really, what, and it's quote unquote, of course, but they want to see a different side to things that they've, their parents have told them, what they've read about, and I think Kulüp in that way is a very good way of, it's a very strong entrance into that field for our Croatian colleagues. It's a TV series about minorities, and more specifically, Jews living in Istanbul during the 1950s. And it revolves around the nightclub and so forth, about the glamour, golden, gilded age, so to speak, of Istanbul nightlife. And I think that, this is why it's so popular, is that it doesn't give this official narrative, but it gives something that, and I think it connects with people right now, the younger generation, who feel very much marginalized and under pressure in terms of lifestyle, sexual preference, pretty much their own existence by the state and by the regime.
Okay, so
Jeremy,
I think we can pretty much agree about the fact that struggle goes on both at the level of the text and at the level of the audience. Both the text is not obviously produced by just one actor or voice, and neither does the audience, even when it consumes in large numbers and it makes something popular, doesn't mean that it's always reading in hegemonically, as I think also Krešimir was indicating earlier, and as is widely known in cultural studies. So yeah, obviously, as also Pierre says, audience research in future projects of this kind would be also interesting to read. We are just at the end of this gathering. Could I ask just very briefly any one of the editors to reflect on one element which made a significant part of this project, of this book, which is academic friendship that extended beyond different countries, beyond borders, obviously, and which made this book possible. We see in the front pages of the book heartfelt testimonies of the editors that speak to a very obviously intense period of collaboration, which was clearly not only academic, but was also about friendship. So can you just tell us about how this collaboration took place and what made it possible?
So the melodramatic acknowledgement section is purely my fault. I wrote all of that part. It was a traumatic event that had happened a few days earlier. I had lost, my cat, so I was feeling very sad, and that's why I had this very kind of, dark emotions when I was writing it. But yeah, I think, one thing that, aside from having a fantastic book, one thing that I really enjoyed from the entire experience was that I got two friends for life, Kaya and Pierre. And, we've been through thick and thin, we've had good times, we've had bad times. We've gone through a pandemic while trying to do a research project. This was part of a wider research project about atheism and unbelief in Turkey. So it was, it was a big journey, and maybe for me the most kind of, how should I say, exciting or how should I say, moment that encapsulates everything in the book was we were on a road trip in Texas, you know, of all places, and it was we were listening to like indie rock and, you know, driving for hours and talking about what we do in the book. And I think it was Pierre. What was the name of the you had this band with the national anthems, like that was
Leibach, you guys also know them.
Exactly. So we were listening to Leibach, and I don't know the whole story. I don't know. Somehow that moment struck with me. That's all I'll say.
I didn't know Leibach can be inspirative in this way, but
in Texas,
there you go. Audience research. Audience research. Okay. And Kaya, do you expect any? I mean, obviously you are speaking very openly about the regime you are claiming in this book to be very closed. So how do you, after the book is released, what's your, how will you work with the book in your own academic environment in Istanbul?
Well, I mean, we are working on Turkish translation because at that stage it's like 85 sterlins, that's pounds, and maybe this devaluation of Turkish lira. It's not wise to expect Turkish academics or those circles to acquire book and discuss widely. But the Turkish translation would make it easier, so that's going to maybe take another year. After that, I think personally, what I say was pretty controversial. The Sunni supremacism was pointing out that, and I should
already caused quite a bit of fuss.
Through another work, I already have made some enemies, I guess. Not, of course, I'm not saying in the real sense, but some people have distaste about the way I, understand it, put it there. So honestly, when it's coming to this idea of Turkishness, I was writing about that. I have a colleague, he's kind of known for that, but it shouldn't let me, treat him that way too. So when you're writing about this Turkishness, Sunniness, and, like those supremacism issues, you should expect anything, I guess. Here, it's like wide range of, let's say, troubles and problems I'm talking, but, I kind of enjoy what I'm writing, and I enjoy doing it with these two guys. We are working on another thing, so it's like quite fruitful for me, and like there are always those circles, chances we discuss. We have to discuss in conferences, workshops. We also have to mention that this work is also a product of the workshop. We met with our contributors at that workshop. It's specifically organized, of course, and discuss all those articles to be there. So in that sense, I'm pretty hopeful, positive. We are working on another book, so, and looking for new ones, new research projects. In that sense, I'm quite happy, quite content with myself, I must say, with my co-editors too.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Pierre, maybe we forgot Pierre.
Yeah, I mean, just it's very rare to work on an academic project and then also find friendship there. And it's also very rare to find, a safe space, a group of people with mutual trust in academia. It's I'm quite disillusioned about this in a German academic context. So, yeah, I'm very grateful.
It's rare to have friends who send stuff according to deadlines. Sometimes friendship can be used to extend that indefinitely.
Yeah, of course. And you can even have a road trip finance in Texas. Find research money.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much, Zlatan, for moderating this.
Yeah, Zlatan, thank you so
much. And Pashko, you're welcome. Pashko and Dino. It's just okay.
Slapping hands, but
oh, sorry. Okay, good. All right. It was great to be in your company this evening. Thank you, everyone, and good luck to everyone in this renewed dark times. We hope. Yeah. I hope we meet again soon. In fact, in person.
Yeah,
that will be a success in itself.
Yeah.
All right. And I wish a lot of audience, I mean, a lot of readers to this fantastic book. So.
It will be released, by the way, I think on Open Culture next year, so you'll be able to access it for free. So that's pretty cool.
Okay. I think Pierre wrote in the messaging system that it will be in autumn this year.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye everyone.
take
Take
care.
care.
Bye-bye.
İyi akşamlar. Guten Abend. Dober večer. Bonsoir.